Greetings, YouTube. Mike Cayley 7 here on the first day of November. Now it's evening time. It's 5:18 and I'm heading home. But first, you didn't say hi. I need to go get my drugs. Gotta take my Eliquis. I ran out, so must to have the Eliquis. So today's topic is going to be inspired by one of my viewers. I'm sorry, I don't remember who asked for this, but somebody said, "Hey, tell us more about your dad. Give us another dad story." So I'll give you another dad story. I'll start out more generally by telling you his philosophy of life. So I guess it's kind of like a little bio of my dad. He was born in 1936 in May in Somerville, Massachusetts. He was born in Boston, but his family was in Somerville, Massachusetts on the McGrath Highway. And he never knew his dad because my grandmother banished my grandfather from the entire city of Somerville on point of death. And my grandmother ended up marrying this other guy from Nova Scotia by the name of Gam. Everybody called him Gam, Clarence. And so that was the guy that my dad grew up knowing as his de facto father, even though he knew it wasn't really his dad. And World War II broke out, 5 years after my dad was born? So he was like 5. And, of course, all the propaganda about, Germans being evil and bad and everybody hates the Germans. Well, my father looked very Aryan, very German. Pointy nose, very pale skin, blonde hair. And so, growing up in an Italian neighborhood, looking that way was pretty rough. And one of his very first stories was he was playing in his backyard, and then all of a sudden somebody threw a rock over and it hit him on the top of the head. He's like 5-6 years old, and he grabs his head and he's like, "Ow, son of a bitch." 5 years old, right? So he takes a sidewalk brick, was in the backyard, and he hurls that over the fence. He hears somebody scream, "Ah!" A few minutes later, his mother calls him, "David, get in here." He gets in the house. There's a little kid standing there on the porch with his mom, and he's bleeding from the head. And the mother said, "Your son did this to my son." So my grandmother said, "David, what happened?" "Well, I was playing in the yard, and all of a sudden this rock come and hit me on the head. So I threw a brick over it, the one that threw me a rock at me." So my grandmother basically told the lady to go get bent, and sent them packing. Screw you. So that was one of my father's very first memories. He was always having to fight. He had an older brother, but the older brother was like 16 years older. He had an older sister. She was like 12 years older or 13 years older. And they were kind of already out in the world. His brother went off to war, World War II, got a Silver Star in Patton's Tank Corps, 781st. And he taught my dad a little bit of how to fight. But my dad had to kind of go it on his own, figure it out for himself how to survive, basically. And back in those days, it was the mean streets, it was the Depression era. And he fought all the time, street fighting. Bricks and chains and rocks and glass and whatever you can get your hands on. And when I grew up, when I was a kid, he had that mentality in him. So one day I had a bully bothering me in school, and I told him about it. And he says, "Here's what you do. Is a kid bigger than you?" "Yeah, Dad." "All right, what you do is you follow him home. Watch the way he walks to get home. And you see where he turns a corner. And what you do is, you wait in a blind alley around that corner. And when he passes by that corner, you take a 2x4 and you hit him in the back of the head. Whack! And he falls on the ground, you kick him and you punch him and you beat him. And when he's laying there bleeding and he can't get up, you grab a big wad of his hair in your hand and you bend down and you whisper in his ear, "Next time I'll kill you." And I'm sitting there going, I'm 6. I'm 6 years old. There's no way in hell that I'm going to do that. But that was his attitude. If a bunch of bullies are bothering you, you go for the toughest one. The one that talks the most, the one that acts the most tough, that's the one you go for. And what you do is you make a fist like this, and you come right down, bam, right on his nose, right on the bridge of his nose, bam, and flatten his whole nose, and blood will blow everywhere. That'll take the fight right out of him. And then his buddies will run away too, because they're afraid now. They're scared. So I'm sitting there thinking, I don't want to do this. I just didn't have that in me. I was a very kind of gentle, pleasant little kid. I didn't want to make anybody bleed. But he insisted, that I learn all the stuff that he learned in the Marine Corps and elsewhere. And so I was flipping him and doing kicks and punches and all this stuff. Because his attitude was, you have to fight all the time. And he said, you know, son, when I'm looking at somebody coming in the room, I don't care who it is, I'm immediately sizing him up. I'm looking for weaknesses. If he's got a limp, if he's got a bad back, he tells me he's got a bad back, that's where I'm going to hit him. Everybody I look at, I'm planning a fight with him. I never sit with my back to the door. I always sit with my back to the wall. And I'm ready at all times. Like, damn, this man was living like he was a caged animal, ready to fight at every single opportunity. And he saw every person as a threat that he would assess, kind of like Terminator vision, He got in fights all the time in school, because that's what everybody did, the bullies, There's this one guy was a boxer. And my father didn't know how to box when he was a little kid. This kid would beat the shit out of my dad. Because, he did the boxing stuff. My dad didn't know how to counter that. So, one day, my dad saw him in the I guess it was the cafeteria or the gym or something. And they're like 10 or 11 or 12, I don't remember. He takes a flying leap. This is what he said. I took a flying leap on the kid. And I grabbed him, by the back of his neck and the seat of his pants, and I slammed him through the back of a chair. And then the pieces of wood were broken off, and they were like this, and I pulled up from his chin. I held his chin up, and I had his neck digging into those wooden things. And I'm just beating the shit out of him, That kid didn't get up. And he never bothered me again. That was my dad. They called him Crazy Jones when he was a kid. Crazy Jones. And you knew, you don't get him angry, he'll fight. And his dad, my grandfather, or my step-grandfather, used to call him a bull. He says, "You're a bull. There's no finesse to you. You're nothing but a bull." Because my dad, he felt like the world was against him from day one. He had no father. His stepfather didn't really care about him. Was kind of a drunk anyway. His mom was kind of nuts. He had to fight all the time. And he got the temper, I figured out he got the temper from his mother's side of the family. My grandmother, she was part Irish and part Scottish. And the Scottish side, what I think had the anger. Here's an example of my grandmother. She's walking to the store one day. She's out in front of this store somewhere, and some lady is giving her gup. Giving her guff, whatever she says. Give me gup. And she cold cocked a lady right in the face and knocked her through a plate glass window at the local vegetable store or whatever. And she took off running. My grandmother took off running with my dad. Next day she goes in there, and nobody saw her do it apparently. And in those days, I guess the other lady wasn't going to talk. I don't know why she wouldn't, but anyway, my dad said the window was boarded up. And the grocer was like, "Can you believe how this neighborhood is? Somebody broke my window yesterday." And my grandma was like, "Oh, that's terrible. This place is going to hell in a handbasket." And she's the one that did it. Years later, many years, decades later, about 5 years after my father died, we found his siblings, and I asked them, one of the first questions I asked them was, "Do you guys have this rage thing where you get angry and you see red and you destroy the world kind of thing?" And immediately the answer was, no. I mean, we do get angry now, and we're very good at fighting. But no, we don't have that. Like, okay, so that's an affliction that comes from my grandmother's side, my dad's mom's side of the family. That temper, ooh, that's legendary in my family. The temper that we have. And so I didn't have it. My father he had it when he was young, because he had to, I guess. And they grew up under siege, fighting. He was a crane operator. He had terrible asthma as a kid. And so he didn't finish school. And back in those days, it wasn't as big a thing, I guess. He ended up working for Crane Service. It was a company in Somerville, Mass, working on the cranes. And he joined the Union Local 4. So we got a viewer, hey, 4-footer. So he joined Local 4 and was working on the cranes from the age of 16. Back in those days, they didn't have hydraulics. Everything was, cables and pulling and pushing, and you had to be strong. He'd break down the boom on his own. Almost died several times. He had many, accidents that happened on the job. Because they didn't have, OSHA back then. So maybe I'll tell you a few of the injuries he had in my next video. How about that? Alright, this is Mike Haley 7. Coming to you from Fuquay Arena, North Carolina. On this beautiful Friday, November 1st, 2019. I will talk to you later.